In the war-torn mountains of Eastern Europe, a Navy SEAL extraction team was about to discover that their routine rescue mission would shatter everything they thought they knew about duty and sacrifice. What started as a simple hostage retrieval took a shocking turn when they came face to face with a woman who held the power to prevent thousands of deaths. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't your typical humanitarian aid worker. For 15 years, she had spent her life as one of the CIA's most lethal operatives, known for her perfect memory and ability to vanish into any identity. When they encountered Elena calmly treating her captor's wounds, they had no idea they were walking into a moral labyrinth that would test every principle they held sacred. Elena's refusal to abandon her patients would lead to a revelation that made her more valuable than an entire military division. What began as a rescue mission would become a fight for redemption. The mountainous region would never be the same after Elena chose to resurrect the ghost she tried so hard to bury. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The steady thrum of rotor blades cut through the night air as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison studied the classified briefing folder in his hands, the red-tinted cabin lighting casting harsh shadows across the tactical photos spread before him. 30,000 feet above the war-torn mountains of Eastern Europe, the transport helicopter carried his 4-man SEAL team toward what should have been a routine extraction operation. Should have been. Target is Dr. Elena Vasquez, age 38, humanitarian aid worker with Doctors Without Borders. Dr. James Crawford's voice crackled through the comm system, his tone carefully measured despite the helicopter's violent shuddering through turbulent mountain air. She was taken hostage 3 days ago during an insurgent raid on a medical camp near the Serbian border. Morrison glanced up from the photos. Standard surveillance shots of the dark-haired woman in medical scrubs, her face partially obscured by surgical masks in most images. Something about Crawford's presentation nagged at him, a subtle hesitation in the CIA liaison's voice that didn't match the straightforward nature of the mission brief. "Sir, with respect," Petty Officer Maria Santos spoke up from her position near the communications array, her fingers dancing across encrypted channels with practiced efficiency. "A single hostage extraction in hostile territory seems like overkill for a full SEAL team. Local assets couldn't handle this?" Crawford's pause lasted a beat too long. "The political implications are significant. Dr. Vasquez has been working in conflict zones for 5 years. Her capture has drawn international attention. State Department wants this handled with absolute precision." Chief Petty Officer David Williams, whose massive frame somehow managed to look comfortable in the cramped cabin, raised an eyebrow. Tank to his teammates, Williams had seen enough missions to recognize bureaucratic doublespeak. International attention for one aid worker? Must be some doctor. "She is," Crawford replied quickly. Too quickly. "Published researcher, speaks 6 languages, has been instrumental in establishing medical infrastructure throughout the region. Her loss would be considerable." Morrison caught the subtle exchange of glances between his team members. Santos, ghost for her ability to infiltrate any communication network undetected, was frowning at her equipment displays. Petty Officer Kim, their sniper and reconnaissance specialist known as Prophet for his uncanny ability to predict enemy movements, sat silently analyzing the terrain maps with laser focus. "What's the timeline on the capture?" Prophet asked without looking up from his maps, his analytical mind always focused on patterns and probabilities. 72 hours ago, as I mentioned. No ransom demands, no political statements. Most insurgent groups would have made their demands public by now, especially if international attention is already focused on the target. Another pause. "Intelligence is still developing." Morrison closed the briefing folder and fixed Crawford with a steady stare. "Doctor, I've run extractions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and half a dozen other hellholes. In my experience, when the agency classifies a simple hostage rescue at this level and sends a SEAL team instead of local assets, there's usually more to the story." "Commander Morrison, I understand your concerns, but operational security requires..." 2 minutes to drop zone. The pilot's voice cut through the tension. Weather's holding, but we've got limited window before dawn. The conversation died as the team shifted into operational mode. Ghost ran final communications checks, establishing encrypted channels and backup frequencies. Prophet reviewed terrain features one last time, committing every ridge and valley to memory. Tank methodically checked his explosive charges and breaching equipment, his massive hands moving with surprising gentleness as he secured each component. Morrison felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over his mind, the mental state that had kept him and his teams alive through countless operations. But beneath that calm, unease continued to gnaw at him. Crawford's evasions, the mission's classification level, the complete lack of intelligence on the insurgent group's motivations, it all pointed to complications that wouldn't be resolved until they were on the ground. 1 minute, the pilot called. The team moved in practiced synchronization, checking gear and preparing for insertion. As Morrison clipped his fast rope harness and checked his weapon systems, he caught Ghost's eye. She gave him a subtle nod. Communications were secure, but she'd noticed the same inconsistencies he had. 30 seconds. Good luck, gentlemen. And lady. Morrison keyed his comm. Remember, we go in quiet, extract the target, and get out clean. If this is just a simple rescue, we should be back here in 6 hours. He paused, watching his team's faces in the red light. But stay sharp. Something about this feels wrong. The helicopter's side door slid open, revealing the pitch-black mountain landscape below. One by one, they rappelled into the darkness, disappearing into the rocky terrain like ghosts in the night. 2 hours later, as Morrison watched the insurgent compound through night vision binoculars from their concealed observation post, his unease crystallized into certainty. The facility wasn't just fortified, it was professionally fortified, with overlapping fields of fire, hardened communication positions, and patrol patterns that suggested military training far beyond standard guerrilla capabilities. "Boss," Prophet's voice whispered through the comm. "I count at least 12 sniper positions, all professionally constructed. This isn't some ragtag insurgent group." Ghost's voice joined the conversation. "Communication intercepts are minimal, but what I'm picking up suggests they're using Russian military encryption protocols." Tank's assessment came last. The defensive positions were built by someone who knows their business. This isn't about holding a single hostage. This whole setup is designed to withstand a siege. Morrison lowered his binoculars, the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to shape in his mind. Whatever Dr. Elena Vasquez really was, she wasn't just a humanitarian aid worker, and whatever was waiting for them in that compound, it wasn't going to be the simple extraction Crawford had described. The mountain wind carried the distant sounds of voices from the compound, speaking in languages his team couldn't identify. But one thing was becoming clear. Elena Vasquez's captors weren't just waiting for ransom demands or political negotiations. They were waiting for something else entirely. The mountain wind carried the distant sounds of voices from the compound, speaking in languages his team couldn't identify. Morrison lowered his night vision binoculars and made his decision. Whatever Elena Vasquez really was, she wasn't going to remain a captive on his watch. "Ghost, what's the communication chatter telling you?" Morrison whispered into his comm, watching the compound's perimeter guards through the scope of his rifle. "Minimal radio traffic, but I'm detecting encrypted burst transmissions every 15 minutes. Someone's reporting in regularly." Santos adjusted her equipment, her fingers moving across the communication array with practiced precision. "The encryption is military grade, definitely not standard insurgent equipment." Morrison felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. Every instinct told him to abort, to call for backup, to question Crawford's intelligence one more time. But somewhere in that fortified compound, an American citizen was being held captive, and that trumped all other considerations. "Prophet,
Give me the patrol schedule." Kim's voice came through crystal clear despite the wind. "Guards rotate every 2 hours. Next changeover is in 18 minutes. Eastern approach has a 40-second blind spot when the roving patrol passes behind the chapel ruins. Tank, breach points. Main gate's too heavy, but there's a weak spot in the north wall where the old stonework is crumbling. I can get us through quietly with shaped charges, but it will take 3 minutes to set up."
Morrison studied the compound one more time, memorizing every shadow and sightline. The monastery had been built into the mountainside itself, its ancient stone walls now reinforced with modern defensive positions. Whoever had planned this operation had chosen their location well, easily defensible, multiple escape routes, and remote enough that any rescue attempt would take hours to organize. "We go in quiet and fast," he decided. "Prophet, take overwatch position on the ridge. You see anything that threatens the team, you eliminate it. Ghost, maintain communication blackout until we have the target. I don't want Crawford knowing we're inside until we're ready to extract. Tank, you're with me on entry." The team moved like shadows across the rocky terrain, their movements synchronized through years of training and shared combat experience. Morrison felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with crossing the line from planning to execution, when theoretical became reality and lives hung in the balance. Tank reached the breach point first, his massive frame somehow managing to move silently across the loose scree. His hands worked with surgical precision as he placed the shaped charges, the small explosives designed to create a clean entry point without bringing down half the wall. Charges set. 30 seconds. Morrison pressed against the cold stone, feeling the weight of his weapon and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. 18 years of operations had taught him to find calm in these moments, to let training take over when the stakes were highest. The muffled thump of the explosion was barely audible, but the result was perfect. A hole just large enough for a man to crawl through, with minimal debris. Morrison went first, his weapon ready, night vision painting the compound's courtyard in ghostly green tones. What he saw stopped in cold. The courtyard wasn't empty. Instead of the chaos he had expected, guards rushing toward the explosion, alarms sounding, defensive positions being manned, he found an eerily calm scene. In the center of the open space, under the pale light of battery-powered lanterns, a woman in civilian clothes knelt beside a wounded man, her hands steady as she worked on what appeared to be a gunshot wound. Elena Vasquez was treating her captors. Morrison held up a fist, signaling Tank to freeze. Through his scope, he watched Elena work, her movements confident and precise. She spoke softly to her patient in what sounded like Serbian, her voice calm and reassuring despite the circumstances. "Target acquired, but the situation is unusual." "Define unusual." Prophet's voice crackled back. Morrison watched Elena finish bandaging the wounded man's shoulder, then moved to check on 2 other injured insurgents lying nearby. None of the guards seemed concerned about her movements. If anything, they appeared grateful for her presence. "She's providing medical care to the enemy." Elena looked up suddenly, her dark eyes scanning the shadows where Morrison lay concealed. For a moment, he thought he'd spotted him, but then she returned to her work, speaking quietly to one of the guards in what sounded like Russian. Morrison made his decision, moving to contact. He worked his way around the perimeter of the courtyard, using the deep shadows cast by the ancient stone walls. Tank followed, his bulk somehow managing to remain silent despite the rocky ground. When they reached the eastern side of the compound, Morrison found what he'd been looking for: a side entrance leading to what had once been the monastery's cells. The door was unlocked. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit by hanging lanterns, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. I could hear voices ahead,
Elena's voice mixed with others speaking in a mixture of languages that shifted seamlessly from English to Serbian to what might have been Arabic. They found her in what was once a monk's cell, now converted into a makeshift medical facility. Elena knelt beside a young insurgent who couldn't have been more than 19, her hands working to clean and dress a shrapnel wound on his leg. Medical supplies were spread across a wooden table, professional-grade equipment that seemed far beyond what a captured aid worker should have access to. Morrison stepped into the doorway, his weapon lowered but ready. "Dr. Vasquez." Elena's hand stilled for just a moment, but she didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes held none of the fear or relief he'd expected to see in a hostage's face. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like resignation. "You must be the rescue team. I wondered when you'd arrive." "Ma'am, we're here to extract you. We need to move quickly." Elena returned to her work, her hands gentle as she secured the bandage on her patient's leg. The young man looked up at Morrison with eyes wide with fever and pain, clearly unaware that the armed stranger represented his enemy.
"I can't leave," Elena said simply. "Not yet." Morrison felt Tank tense beside him. This wasn't how extractions were supposed to go. Hostages were supposed to be grateful, desperate to escape. They weren't supposed to refuse rescue. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not your decision. We have orders to look around you," Elena interrupted, finally meeting his gaze directly. "These men need medical attention. If I leave now, some of them will die." Morrison studied her face, searching for signs of Stockholm Syndrome or coercion. What he found instead was something that reminded him of his own medics, the same calm competence, the same unwavering focus on preserving life, regardless of politics or circumstances. "Dr. Vasquez, our intelligence indicates you've been held against your will for 3 days. These people are your captors." Elena's laugh held no humor. "Captors? Is that what Crawford told you?" She gestured around the makeshift medical facility. "Does this look like a prison to you?" Before Morrison could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridor. Tank spun toward the doorway, his weapon raised, just as 2 insurgents rounded the corner at full speed. The firefight lasted exactly 4 seconds. Tank's training took over, his shots precise and controlled. The first insurgent dropped immediately, but the second managed to get off a burst from his AK-47 before Prophet's sniper rifle spoke from the ridge outside, ending the threat with surgical precision. In the sudden silence that followed, Morrison realized that Tank was down, blood spreading across his tactical vest from a grazing wound to his shoulder. Elena moved without hesitation. She was beside Tank in an instant, her hands already working to assess the damage. Morrison watched in amazement as she cut away the damaged gear with a combat knife that appeared in her hands as if from nowhere, her movements swift and professional. "It's not deep, but it's bleeding heavily," she said, her voice completely calm despite the gunfire that had just erupted around her. "I need to clean and pack the wound before we move." "Doc, we need to get out of here," Morrison said urgently. "That gunfire will bring every hostile in the area." Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her hands worked as she spoke, applying pressure to stop the bleeding before beginning to clean the wound with professional efficiency. "Then we'd better make sure your man can travel. Otherwise, you'll be carrying dead weight." Morrison studied her technique, noting details that didn't match her supposed background. Her movements were too sure, too practiced for someone who'd spent only 5 years in humanitarian aid work. The way she handled the combat knife, the tactical awareness she'd shown when the shooting started, the complete absence of shock or panic, it all pointed to training that went far beyond medical school. "Who are you really?" he asked quietly. Elena looked up from her work, meeting his gaze directly. For just a moment, her carefully constructed facade seemed to crack, revealing something deeper, older, more complex, and infinitely more dangerous. "Someone who's been trying very hard to forget," she said simply,
returning to work on Tank's shoulder. As she finished bandaging the wound, Morrison heard Ghost's voice crackling through his comm. "Boss, we've got movement all around the compound. Whatever you did in there, it stirred up the hornet's nest." Elena stood, her hands stained with Tank's blood, but her eyes clear and focused. "Commander Morrison, if you want to get your team out of here alive, you're going to have to trust me, and you're not going to like what I have to do to make that happen." Morrison looked into Elena's dark eyes and saw something that made his breath catch, the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had killed before and would do so again if necessary. This wasn't the humanitarian aid worker from Crawford's briefing photos. This was someone else entirely. Someone far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Morrison looked into Elena's dark eyes and saw something that made his breath catch, the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had killed before and would do so again if necessary. This wasn't the humanitarian aid worker from Crawford's briefing photos. This was someone else entirely. "We move now," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority that seemed to come from deep within her bones. She helped Tank to his feet, supporting his weight with surprising strength. "The eastern corridor leads to a service entrance. From there we can reach the old stone bridge without crossing the main courtyard."
Morrison keyed his comm. "Ghost, Prophet, we're moving to extraction point Beta. Elena's with us." "Copy that, boss," Prophet's voice crackled back. "But I'm seeing movement on all approaches. Whatever happened in there has them stirred up like angry wasps." As they moved through the narrow corridor, Morrison watched Elena carefully. Her steps were measured and silent, her head turning at precise intervals to check corners and potential ambush points. She moved like someone who had spent years navigating hostile territory, not as a civilian aid worker, but as something far more lethal. "Left here," she whispered, guiding them through a maze of passages that seemed impossibly complex for someone who had supposedly been held captive for only 3 days. "There's a drainage tunnel that connects to the old foundations. It'll get us past their perimeter guards." Tank stumbled slightly, his wounded shoulder making movement difficult. Elena immediately steadied him, her touch gentle, but her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Morrison noted how she positioned herself to cover Tank's blind spots, her body language screaming tactical awareness. "Doc," Tank whispered, his voice strained with pain. "How do you know this place so well?" Elena's step faltered for just a moment. "I studied the architectural plans when I first arrived in the region. Old monasteries like this one follow standard Byzantine construction patterns." The explanation was smooth, practiced, but Morrison caught the slight tremor in her voice. She was lying, and she knew he knew it. They reached the service entrance without incident, but as Elena pushed open the heavy wooden door, Morrison saw her freeze. Her entire body went rigid, and her hand moved instinctively toward her waist where a weapon would normally rest. "What is it?" Morrison whispered. "The patrol patterns changed. They should have 2 guards on the eastern approach, but I count 4, and they're positioned for an ambush, not perimeter security." "How can you tell?" Morrison studied her face. Elena's eyes met his, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed facade slipped entirely. "Because it's what I would do." Before Morrison could process that admission fully, the night erupted into chaos. The ambush was perfectly executed, crossfire from concealed positions, coordinated movement that cut off their escape routes, and suppressing fire that pinned them against the monastery's stone walls. Morrison recognized professional military tactics when he saw them, and these weren't insurgents playing at war. But what stunned him was Elena's reaction. She moved like liquid lightning, her body dropping into a combat crouch as she assessed the tactical situation with impossible speed. Her eyes tracked muzzle flashes, calculated angles of fire, and identified weak points in the ambush formation, all in the space of 3 seconds. "Sniper on the ridge, 200 meters northeast," she called out, her voice cutting through the gunfire with clinical precision. "Machine gun nest behind the stone wall, suppressing fire to keep us pinned. 2 assault teams moving to flank from the north and south." Morrison stared at her.
No civilian should have been able to read a tactical situation that quickly or that accurately. "Prophet, confirm sniper position northeast ridge," Morrison called into his comm. "How did—" Prophet's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed. I have eyes on target, but he's in hardened position. I need 30 seconds to get a clear shot." Elena was already moving, her hand finding a loose stone from the monastery's crumbling wall. With a motion that spoke of years of training, she hurled it toward a cluster of metal debris, creating a sharp clang that drew the sniper's attention for just long enough. Prophet's rifle spoke once, and the suppressing fire from the ridge went silent. "Impossible," Morrison breathed, as watching Elena scan for the next threat. "Machine gun nest, 11 o'clock," she continued, seemingly unaware of Morrison's amazement. "Tank, if you can put a breaching charge on that wall, the backblast will take out their position." Tank looked at Morrison for confirmation, blood still seeping through his bandages. Morrison nodded, and Tank began preparing his explosives with practiced efficiency. "Boss," Ghost's voice crackled through the comm, "I'm picking up encrypted transmissions. Someone's coordinating this attack from a command position. They know our frequencies, our call signs, everything." Elena's head snapped up. "Crawford." "What?" Morrison demanded. "Your handler, Dr. Crawford. He's feeding them information. This was never a rescue mission, Commander Morrison. This was a trap." The pieces began falling into place in Morrison's mind. Crawford's evasive answers, the mission's unusual classification level, the perfectly positioned ambush. But before he could voice his suspicions, his comm crackled to life. "Morrison, what's your status?" Crawford's voice cut through the static, carrying an edge of barely controlled tension. Morrison keyed his comm, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "We have the package, but we're pinned down. Heavy resistance. Professional military tactics." "Copy that. Can you confirm the package's identity?" Something in Crawford's tone made Morrison's blood run cold. "Say again?" "I need verbal confirmation of the package's identity, Commander." Elena closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging as if an enormous weight had settled on them. When she opened them again, Morrison saw resignation mixed with something that looked almost like grief. "Tell him," she said quietly. "Tell him you have Ghost 7. The comm went silent for a long moment. When Crawford's voice returned, it carried a different quality entirely. Satisfaction, mixed with something that might have been relief. "Confirmed, Ghost 7. Maintain position. Extraction team en route." Morrison felt the world shift around him. Ghost 7. The code name was legendary among special operations circles. A CIA operative so deep undercover that most people believed the name was just a myth. Someone who had supposedly been responsible for intelligence coups across 3 continents, who had disappeared without a trace 5 years ago after a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. "Elena Vasquez doesn't exist, does she?" Morrison said quietly. Elena shook her head, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. "She's who I've been trying to become for 5 years, but it seems the past doesn't stay buried as easily as I had hoped." Tank's explosive detonated, taking out the machine gun nest and providing a brief respite from the incoming fire. In the sudden quiet, Morrison could hear Elena's ragged breathing, could see her hands trembling as she tried to hold herself together. "My real name is Sarah Chen, codename Ghost 7. For 15 years, I was one of the CIA's most effective deep cover operatives. I have perfect recall of every mission, every contact, every piece of classified intelligence I ever collected." She looked directly at Morrison, and he saw the weight of those 15 years reflected in her eyes. "I know the location of every sleeper cell, every weapons cache, every terrorist network across 3 continents. The intelligence in my head could prevent dozens of future attacks, could save thousands of lives." Her voice broke slightly. "It could also destroy just as many innocent people if it fell into the wrong hands." "The mission that went wrong," Morrison said, beginning to understand. "Sarajevo, 5 years ago. I was tracking an arms dealer who was supplying weapons to terrorist cells across Eastern Europe. The intelligence was perfect. The operation should have been surgical. She wiped tears from her face with the back of her hand. But someone leaked our operational details. When my team hit the warehouse, it wasn't just arms dealers inside. Morrison waited, knowing she needed to tell this story at her own pace. Families, Elena continued, her voice hollow. The arms dealers were using a refugee camp as cover. When the shooting started, 37 civilians died. Men, women, children who had already lost everything to war, killed because I led my team into what should have been a clean operation. The weight of that revelation settled over Morrison like a physical blow. He understood now why Elena had spent 5 years trying to save lives instead of taking them, why she'd chosen to work in conflict zones, helping the very people who had been caught in the crossfire of operations like hers. "So you disappeared," Morrison said. "I died that night in Sarajevo." Sarah Chen, Ghost 7, the woman who had spent 15 years believing that the ends justified any means, she died with those 37 innocent people. Elena Vasquez was born from the ashes, someone who would dedicate what remained of her life to saving people instead of getting them killed. Prophet's voice crackled through the calm. "Boss, I've got eyes on the extraction team," Crawford mentioned. "But they're not coming to get us out. They're moving to surround our position." Elena stood, her moment of vulnerability passing as she reasserted control over her emotions. "Crawford never intended to extract me, Commander. He's been hunting me for 5 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to bring me back into the fold. My capture wasn't random. It was orchestrated." Morrison felt anger building in his chest, hot and fierce. "He used us."
He used all of us. Your team was never meant to rescue me. You were meant to flush me out, to force me to reveal my true nature so he could reclaim his asset. Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. The question now is whether you're going to deliver me to him or whether you're going to trust that the woman I've become is worth more than the operative I used to be. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the mountain valley, and Morrison realized they had minutes before Crawford's real extraction team arrived. Minutes to make a decision that would define not just the success of their mission, but the kind of men they were willing to be. Elena looked at each of them in turn. Morrison with his steady leadership, Tank with his wounded shoulder and unwavering loyalty, and through the calm to Ghost and Prophet maintaining overwatch in increasingly hostile territory. "I won't go back," she said simply. "Whatever happens here tonight, I won't be the person who trades lives for intelligence reports, who sacrifices the innocent for the greater good. Elena Vasquez is who I choose to be, and I'd rather die as her than live as Ghost 7. Morrison made his choice. "Then we get you out of here," he said firmly. "All of us, together." Morrison made his choice. "Then we get you out of here," he said firmly, keying his calm. "All of us, together." Ghost, Prophet, we're scrubbing the original extraction. Crawford's people are hostile. Repeat, Crawford's extraction team is hostile. Santos's voice crackled back immediately, confusion evident. "Boss, confirm hostile designation on friendly forces?" "Confirmed. We're going black on communications. Standard evasion protocols. Rally point Charlie in 6 hours." Elena was already moving, her medical supplies hastily packed into a compact field kit. "Commander, the vehicles Crawford mentioned, they'll have our position locked down in minutes, but there's an old smuggling route through the northern valleys that connects to the main road system." Morrison watched her work, noting how efficiently she prepared for movement despite the chaos around them. "How do you know about smuggling routes?" "Because 5 years ago, I helped map them," Elena admitted, shouldering her pack. "This entire region was part of my operational area when I was tracking arms dealers." Tank struggled to his feet, his wounded shoulder making movement difficult. Morrison moved to support him, but Elena was there first, her strength surprising as she helped the larger man maintain his balance. "The northern route involves a 12-kilometer hike through mountain terrain, but it's our best chance of avoiding both Crawford's people and the local insurgents." "What about the insurgents who were holding you?" Morrison asked. "Where do they fit in all this?" Elena's face darkened. "They weren't holding me, Commander. They were protecting me. From him." Before Morrison could ask who him was, Prophet's voice cut through the calm. "Boss, I've got eyes on the approaching vehicles. 3 armored SUVs, tactical formation.
But there's something else. Military transport helicopter, Russian markings, coming in from the northeast. Elena went rigid, her face draining of color. No, it can't be. What is it? Morrison demanded. Prophet, describe the helicopter's approach pattern, Elena called into Morrison's comm, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Textbook search and destroy formation, multiple gun runs to suppress potential escape routes before landing. Whoever's flying knows their business. Elena closed her eyes, her hands trembling. It's him. After 5 years, he's finally found me. Who? Colonel Viktor Petrov, former Russian Spetsnaz, lost his command because of intelligence I gathered on his unit's activities in Chechnya. He's been hunting me since the day I destroyed his career. Morrison felt the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. Crawford's extraction team approaching from the south, a Russian military helicopter from the northeast, and now the revelation that Elena had a personal enemy with the resources to mount this kind of operation. How does a disgraced Russian colonel end up leading insurgents in Eastern Europe? He asked, already knowing he wasn't going to like the answer. Because he's not disgraced anymore, Elena replied, checking her medical kit one final time. The intelligence I gathered on his unit's activities was passed to Moscow, which led to investigations that destroyed dozens of careers. But Petrov was smart. He made himself indispensable to certain
elements within Russian intelligence who needed someone with his particular skills operating outside official channels. The rotor blades were getting closer, and Morrison could see muzzle flashes in the distance as Crawford's team engaged with the insurgent forces. The monastery had become the center of a three-way battle, with his team caught in the middle. Boss, Ghost's voice crackled through the comm. I'm intercepting Russian military communications. They're coordinating with someone on the ground, setting up a perimeter to cut off all escape routes. Elena was already moving toward the northern passage she'd mentioned, but Morrison caught her arm. Wait, if this Petrov has been hunting you for 5 years, he knows how you think, how you operate. Won't he anticipate the smuggling routes? Elena stopped, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, he saw the legendary operative that she'd once been, calculating, ruthless, always 3 steps ahead of her enemies. Yes, she said quietly, he'll anticipate everything I might do. Unless what? Unless I stop thinking like Elena Vasquez and start thinking like Ghost 7. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Elena's posture shifted, her movements becoming more fluid and predatory. The humanitarian aid worker disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. The northern route is exactly what he'll expect, she said, her voice carrying a new edge. But there's another way, more dangerous, but he won't see it coming because it requires going through his own forces. Tank looked up from where he sat against the stone wall, his face pale from blood loss. Doc, with respect, I'm not sure I can handle a running fight through hostile territory. Elena knelt beside him, her hands checking his bandages with professional efficiency. We're not going to have to fight. We're going to walk right past them. She opened her medical kit and pulled out several items that definitely weren't standard humanitarian aid supplies. Concentrated blood capsules, theatrical makeup, and what looked like small explosive charges disguised as medical equipment. Prophet, she called into Morrison's comm, I need you to put a bullet through my left shoulder, non-vital area, through and through. What? Morrison and Prophet said simultaneously. Petrov is expecting to capture Ghost 7. He's not expecting to find a wounded aid worker being evacuated by American Special Forces after a terrorist attack on a medical facility. Morrison began to understand her plan. You want to pose as a legitimate casualty. More than that, I want to become exactly what Crawford's briefing said I was, Dr. Elena Vasquez, humanitarian aid worker, victim of insurgent violence. Elena began applying the theatrical makeup, creating convincing bruises and dirt stains. Tank, I need you to look like you're helping a wounded civilian, she said, supporting his weight as they prepared to move. Morrison, you're the team leader evacuating casualties under fire. This is insane, Morrison muttered, but he could see the tactical logic. Sometimes the best disguise was hiding in plain sight. They moved through the monastery's eastern exit, Elena leaning heavily on Tank while maintaining the appearance of injury and trauma. Morrison took point, his weapon ready, but held in a defensive rather than aggressive posture. The ruse worked perfectly.
They encountered the first Russian patrol 50 meters from the monastery. Elena immediately began speaking in rapid, panicked Serbian, tears streaming down her face as she described being held captive by insurgents. Morrison played his part, identifying himself as an American Special Forces officer conducting an emergency evacuation. The Russian soldiers barely glanced at Elena, their attention focused on more important matters. After a brief radio check with their command, they waved the group through, pointing them toward a designated casualty collection point. But as they walked away, Morrison noticed one of the soldiers watching Elena with unusual interest. The man raised his radio, speaking in rapid Russian. "Problem," Morrison whispered. Elena's step faltered for just a moment. "What kind of problem?" "One of the soldiers is taking too much interest in you." Elena's breathing quickened, but she maintained her cover. "Did he seem to recognize me?" "Hard to tell." They continued moving, but Morrison could feel eyes on them from multiple directions. The simple plan was beginning to unravel, and they were walking deeper into enemy territory with each step. "Boss?" Prophet's voice whispered through the comm, urgent but controlled. "Russian forces are executing a classic pincer movement, and Crawford's people are pushing up from the south. You've got maybe 10 minutes before they close the noose completely." Morrison scanned the terrain ahead, his tactical mind racing through options. The abandoned village of Kozara spread before them, its war-damaged buildings offering potential cover, but also countless places for enemies to hide. Most of the structures had been gutted by artillery years ago, leaving skeletal stone walls and empty window frames like hollow eyes staring across the valley. "There," Elena said, pointing toward a partially collapsed church at the village's center. "The basement is intact, stone construction, multiple exits and defensive positions. If we're going to make a stand, that's our best option." Tank stumbled, his wounded shoulder finally overcoming his determination to push forward. Morrison caught him, feeling the big man's weight as exhaustion and blood loss took their toll. "I'm slowing you down, boss," Tank gasped, his face pale and drawn. "Maybe you should—" "Nobody gets left behind," Morrison cut him off firmly. "That's not how this team works." Elena was already moving to support Tank's other side, her medical instincts overriding everything else. "We can stabilize him once we reach cover. But Commander, you need to understand, once we're pinned down in that church, this stops being about extraction and starts being about survival." They half-carried Tank through the village's empty streets, their footsteps echoing off abandoned walls. Morrison could hear engines in the distance, the sound growing closer with each passing minute. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen soon.
The church's basement was exactly as Elena had described. A stone chamber that had once stored religious artifacts, now empty except for debris and the lingering smell of old smoke. Elena immediately set about treating Tank's wound while Morrison established radio contact with Ghost and Prophet. "Ghost, what's your status?" "Maintaining overwatch from the bell tower, but I'm seeing coordinated movement from multiple directions. They're not just hunting us anymore, boss. They're conducting a full-scale military operation." Morrison felt the weight of command settling heavier on his shoulders. His team was trapped, one man was wounded, and they were facing professional military forces with resources far beyond anything a simple SEAL team could match. "Elena," he said quietly, "it's time for complete honesty. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Elena looked up from where she was replacing Tank's bandages, her hands steady despite the circumstances. "You want the truth, Commander Morrison? The whole truth?" "Everything." Elena sat back against the stone wall, her eyes distant, as if she was looking backward through time. "For 15 years, as Ghost 7, I was responsible for intelligence operations across 3 continents. I developed networks in 47 countries, identified over 200 terrorist cells, and mapped weapons trafficking routes that supplied conflicts from Afghanistan to Syria. She paused, her voice becoming quieter but more intense. I have perfect recall of every detail. Names, faces, locations, operational methods, financial networks. The intelligence in my head represents the life's work of dozens of operatives and could prevent hundreds of future attacks. Morrison felt something cold settling in his stomach. And the cost of gathering that intelligence. 12 major operations, 734 confirmed hostile casualties, 41 friendly casualties, and 89 civilian casualties that were classified as acceptable losses for the greater good. Tank looked up from where he lay against the wall. Doc, you can't blame yourself for casualties in war zones. That's just reality. Elena's laugh held no humor. Can't I? Let me tell you about Operation Sunrise in Kandahar, where I provided intelligence that led to an airstrike on what we thought was a Taliban command center. Turned out to be a wedding celebration in the wrong building. 23 innocent people died because my intelligence was 90% accurate instead of perfect. Morrison felt his throat tighten. Elena. Or Operation Blackwater in Damascus, where I identified a weapons smuggling network. The raid was successful. We captured millions of dollars in illegal arms. But the explosion that destroyed the warehouse also brought down an adjacent apartment building. 15 families lost their homes, and 7 people died in the collapse. She looked directly at Morrison, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. But the one that broke me, the one that made me realize I couldn't be Ghost 7 anymore, was Operation Glasshouse in Berlin, March 15th, 2019. Morrison's blood turned to ice. That date was burned into his memory forever. I had intelligence on a cell planning to attack transportation infrastructure across Europe. The German authorities acted on my information and prevented the primary target, the Munich airport, from being attacked. The operation was considered a complete success. Morrison's hands began to tremble. No. But the cell had a backup plan, something my intelligence had missed. When we disrupted their primary operation, they activated secondary targets across the continent, including a bombing at a military transport facility near Ramstein Air Base. Stop. Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. 7 American servicemen died in that attack, Commander Morrison. 7 men whose lives could have been saved if my intelligence had been complete, if I had been thorough enough, if I had been better at my job. Morrison closed his eyes, seeing his brother's face as clearly as if David were standing in front of him. Staff Sergeant David Morrison, 26 years old, killed while loading supplies onto a transport aircraft that happened to be in the wrong place, when Elena's incomplete intelligence led to a backup plan no one had anticipated. Your brother was one of them, Elena said quietly. I know because I memorized every name, every face, every detail about the lives that were lost because of what I failed to prevent. Teg struggled to sit up straighter, looking between Morrison and Elena with growing understanding. Boss! I've spent 5 years trying to atone for those deaths. Every life I've saved as Elena Vasquez has been an attempt to balance the scales, to somehow make up for the mistakes I made as Ghost 7. But it's never enough. It can never be enough.
Morrison's radio crackled to life, Crawford's voice cutting through the emotional tension in the basement. Morrison, what's your status? We have assets moving to your location for extraction. Morrison keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. We're secure for now, but Crawford, I need clarification on the mission parameters. Commander, you know what you need to know. Secure the package and prepare for extraction. The package has a name, Morrison said firmly, and she has the right to make her own choices. A pause. Commander, you're dealing with a high-value intelligence asset. Personal preferences are not relevant to operational requirements. Elena reached for the radio. James, it's me.
Hello, Sarah. It's been too long. My name is Elena now, and I'm not coming back. Crawford's laugh was cold and professional. Sarah, you know that's not your decision to make. The intelligence you possess is too valuable to remain buried in some humanitarian fantasy you've created for yourself. Prophet's voice cut through the radio chatter. Boss, I've got eyes on at least 30 hostiles moving to surround your position. We're out of time for philosophical debates. Elena stood, her jaw set with determination. Commander Morrison, I need you to make a choice. You can deliver me to Crawford, let him drag me back to being Ghost 7, and use my intelligence to prevent future attacks. Thousands of lives could be saved. She paused, looking directly into his eyes. Or you can accept that some knowledge is too dangerous to use, that some prices are too high to pay, and that the woman I become has the right to choose redemption over revenge. Tank struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. Doc, whatever you decide, I'm with you. I know something about trying to leave the past behind. Morrison felt the weight of command, of choice, of justice and revenge warring in his heart. Elena's incomplete intelligence had led to his brother's death, but holding her responsible would make him no better than the people who had used her as a weapon for 15 years. Ghost, he called into his radio. What's your assessment? Santos's voice came back immediately. Boss, I've been listening to the comm traffic. This woman has been trying to save lives for 5 years. Maybe it's time someone tried to save hers. Prophet's voice was more pragmatic. Commander, from a tactical standpoint, the intelligence she possesses could prevent numerous future casualties. The utilitarian calculation seems clear. Morrison looked around the basement at his team. Tank wounded but loyal. Ghost advocating for compassion over pragmatism. Prophet focused on numbers and strategic advantage. And Elena, standing in the center of it all, representing both the salvation and the damnation of everything he believed about duty, justice, and the cost of protecting innocent lives. Elena, he said finally, if you cooperate with Crawford, if you go back to being Ghost 7, how many lives could your intelligence save? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And if you don't? Then those people will die because I chose my own peace of mind over their lives. Just like your brother died because my intelligence wasn't complete. Morrison felt the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Outside, he could hear vehicles approaching, voices calling in languages he didn't recognize, the sound of professional military forces preparing to end this standoff one way or another. Boss, Prophet's voice cut through the tension. We're out of time. Whatever we're going to do, it has to be now. Morrison looked one more time at Elena, seeing both the woman who had cost his brother his life and the woman who had spent 5 years trying to atone for that failure. In the end, the choice came down to one simple question. What kind of man did he want to be? The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the ruined church above them, and Morrison made his decision. We get you out of here, he said firmly, keying his comm. All of us. But Elena, if we're going to survive the next hour, I need Ghost 7, not to gather intelligence or run operations, but to keep my team alive. Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them, Morrison saw the transformation beginning. The guilt-ridden humanitarian was still there, but underneath it, something harder and more dangerous was awakening.
The basement has 3 exits, she said, her voice taking on the clipped precision of a professional briefing. Main stairs to the nave, service tunnel to the rectory, and an old smuggling passage that connects to the village's storm drainage system. Smuggling passage, Tank asked, struggling to his feet with Morrison's help. Built during the Yugoslav wars, local resistance used it to move supplies and personnel past Serbian checkpoints. Elena was already moving toward the eastern wall, her hands running along the stone blocks with practiced efficiency. I mapped it during Operation Glasshouse. Morrison felt a chill at the reference to the operation that had cost his brother's life, but pushed the emotion aside. Survival first, reckoning later. Found it, Elena said, pressing against a section of wall that swung inward to reveal a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. It leads northeast about half a kilometer before connecting to the main drainage system. Boss, Ghost's voice crackled through the comm. I count at least 40 hostiles surrounding the church. Russian forces from the north, Crawford's people from the south. They're coordinating their approach.
Elena paused at the tunnel entrance, her face pale but determined. "Commander, once we're in the drainage system, I can get us to the old logging roads. From there, we can reach the Albanian border in 6 hours of hard hiking. Prophet, can you provide overwatch while we move?" "Negative, boss. Too many targets, too much ground to cover. I'll have to leapfrog and meet you at the rally point." Morrison nodded, helping Tank toward the tunnel entrance. The big man's face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes remained determined. "Elena," Morrison said quietly, "I need to know, is using your operational knowledge going to bring Ghost 7 back permanently?" Elena met his gaze, and for a moment he saw the internal war raging behind her dark eyes. "I don't know, but I'd rather risk losing myself than watch your team die because I was too scared to remember who I used to be." They entered the tunnel in single file, Elena first, then Tank, then Morrison bringing up the rear. The passage was cramped and poorly ventilated, forcing them to move in awkward crouches while trying to maintain tactical awareness. "Left fork ahead," Elena whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "The right passage leads to a dead end, learned that the hard way during reconnaissance 5 years ago." Morrison noted how naturally she fell back into operational thinking, providing tactical intelligence without the emotional weight that had characterized Elena Vasquez. It was efficient, professional, and deeply unsettling. They emerged from the tunnel into a larger storm drain, concrete-lined and spacious enough to move upright. Elena immediately began checking sight lines and escape routes, her movements fluid and confident. "This connects to the main system in 200 meters, she said, pointing northeast. "From there we can access multiple exit points throughout the valley." "Doc," Tank said, leaning heavily against the tunnel wall, "how are you holding up? I mean, really?" Elena looked at him, and Morrison saw both sides of her personality warring in her expression. "Every step I take using this knowledge feels like betraying the person I've tried to become. But every time I think about stopping, I remember that you're hurt because you came to save me." They entered the tunnel in single file. Elena first, then Tank, then Morrison bringing up the rear. The passage was cramped and poorly ventilated, forcing them to move in awkward crouches while trying to maintain tactical awareness. "Left fork ahead," Elena whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "The right passage leads to a dead end, learned that the hard way during reconnaissance 5 years ago." Morrison noted how naturally she fell back into operational thinking, providing tactical intelligence without the emotional weight that had characterized Elena Vasquez. It was efficient, professional, and deeply unsettling. They emerged from the tunnel into a larger storm drain, concrete-lined and spacious enough to move upright. Elena immediately began checking sight lines and escape routes, her movements fluid and confident. "This connects to the main system in 200 meters, she said, pointing northeast. "From there we can access multiple exit points throughout the valley." "Doc," Tank said, leaning heavily against the tunnel wall, "how are you holding up? I mean, really?" Elena looked at him, and Morrison saw both sides of her personality warring in her expression. "Every step I take using this knowledge feels like betraying the person I've tried to become. But every time I think about stopping, I remember that you're hurt because you came to save me." They moved through the drainage system in tactical formation, Elena providing guidance while Morrison maintained rear security. The sound of their movement echoed softly off concrete walls, mixing with the distant rumble of vehicles searching the village above. "Exit point ahead," Elena whispered, pointing to a maintenance access 20 meters forward. "It comes up in a copse of trees about 50 meters from the main road." But as they approached the access point, they heard something that made them all freeze. A child's voice, calling out in Serbian. Elena's entire body went rigid. No, she shouldn't be here. "Who?" Morrison demanded. "Amira. She's a refugee I've been treating at the medical camp. If she's here," Elena's voice trailed off as understanding hit her. "She's looking for me." Morrison listened to the voice above, young, frightened, calling Elena's name repeatedly. "We can't risk exposure for one civilian." Elena spun to face him, and for the first time since they'd entered the tunnels, Elena Vasquez instead of Ghost 7 he saw. "She's not just one civilian, Commander. She's 12 years old, orphaned by this war, and she trusted me to keep her safe." "Elena."
"No." Her voice was firm.
I won't abandon her the way I abandoned my principles as Ghost 7. If we leave her up there, Petrov will use her as bait, or worse." Tank looked between them, then spoke quietly. "Doc, what would you need us to do?" Elena's expression softened with gratitude. She's scared and alone. "If we can reach her, I can treat whatever injury she has and bring her with us." "Prophet would say that's tactically unsound," Morrison pointed out. "A child would slow us down, make us more visible, compromise our escape routes." "Prophet would be right from a tactical standpoint," Elena agreed. "But Elena Vasquez can't live with herself if she leaves that child behind. And right now, that matters more to me than perfect operational security." Morrison found himself at another decision point, but this time the choice felt clearer. The woman standing before him wasn't the cold operative who had provided incomplete intelligence about his brother's mission. She was someone who had spent 5 years learning that some things mattered more than tactical advantage. "What's the plan?" Relief flooded Elena's features. "The access point has good concealment from the north and east. If we can reach Amira quickly, I can assess her condition and determine if she's able to travel. And if she's not," Elena's jaw tightened, "then we adapt, but I won't leave her." They climbed through the access point into the small grove of trees, the forest canopy providing welcome cover from potential aerial surveillance. Amira was 20 meters away, a small figure in torn clothing, calling Elena's name with increasing desperation. Elena moved toward the child with remarkable stealth, her medical training and operational experience combining to create smooth, silent movement. Morrison watched her approach the frightened girl, speaking softly in Serbian while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. "She's hurt," Elena called back quietly. "Shrapnel wound to her left leg, not serious but needs cleaning and bandaging." "Can she travel?" Morrison asked. Elena knelt beside Amira, her hands gentle as she examined the injury while speaking in soothing tones. The transformation was remarkable. Ghost 7's tactical efficiency merged seamlessly with Elena Vasquez's compassionate care. "She can travel, but will need to move more slowly," Elena replied, already beginning to clean the wound with supplies from her field kit. "She knows paths through these mountains that aren't on any map, refugee routes her family used before they were killed." Tank limped over to where Elena worked, his own pain temporarily forgotten as he watched her interaction with the injured child. "Doc, you're different when you're helping her. More complete, I guess." Elena looked up at him while continuing to bandage Amira's leg. "This is why I became Elena Vasquez. Not to hide from what I'd done as Ghost 7, but to find a way to use everything I'd learned, the good and the bad, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." Morrison keyed his comm. "Ghost, Prophet, we're moving to Rally Point Charlie, but we've got an additional person. Child refugee, injured but mobile." "Copy that, boss," Ghost replied. "I'll adjust overwatch patterns accordingly." Prophet's response was more measured. "Boss, a child significantly increases our operational risk profile." "Understood, Prophet, but sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same thing." Elena finished treating Amira's wound and helped the girl to her feet. As she did, Morrison saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before, a sense of integration, as if the two halves of her identity were finally finding a way to coexist. "Amira knows a path through the eastern ridges," Elena said, translating the child's rapid Serbian. "It's longer than the logging roads, but it avoids the main valleys where Petrov's forces are concentrating their search." "How much longer?" 8 hours instead of 6, but we'll have better concealment and multiple escape routes if we're discovered." Morrison looked at his wounded demolitions expert, the frightened child, and the woman who was somehow managing to be both a legendary operative and a humanitarian aid worker simultaneously. "Then that's the route we take," he decided. "Lead the way." As they began moving through the forest, Elena walking beside Amira while speaking quietly in Serbian, Morrison realized something had fundamentally changed. Elena wasn't choosing between being Ghost 7 or Elena Vasquez anymore. She was finding a way to be both, using every skill she possessed in service of protecting rather than destroying. For the first time since the mission began, Morrison felt something that might have been hope.
As they began moving through the forest, Elena walking beside Amira while speaking quietly in Serbian, Morrison realized something had fundamentally changed. Elena wasn't choosing between being Ghost 7 or Elena Vasquez anymore. She was finding a way to be both, using every skill she possessed in service of protecting rather than destroying. For the first time since the mission began, Morrison felt something that might have been hope. They had been hiking for 2 hours through increasingly dense forest when Elena suddenly raised her fist, the universal signal to halt. Morrison immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, his weapon ready as he scanned the surrounding trees. "What is it?" he whispered. Elena's head was tilted, listening to something beyond normal human hearing. Years of operational experience had given her an almost supernatural ability to detect danger, and right now, every instinct was screaming warnings. "The forest is too quiet," she said softly. "No bird calls, no insect sounds. Something has disturbed the natural patterns." Tank struggled to maintain his footing, the combination of blood loss and rough terrain taking its toll. "Could be natural predators." "No," Elena's voice carried absolute certainty. "This is tactical silence. Someone is out there, and they're trying very hard not to be detected." Morrison keyed his comm. "Ghost, Prophet, what's your status?" Static answered him. "Ghost, respond." More static, then a brief crackle that might have been someone trying to speak through heavy interference. Elena's face went pale. "Jamming, military-grade equipment, probably Russian-made." "How can you tell?" "Because I've used the same equipment in operations across Eastern Europe." Elena's operational knowledge was surfacing again, but this time Morrison found it reassuring rather than unsettling. "The jamming pattern is designed to disrupt American military frequencies while leaving Russian channels clear." Amira tugged on Elena's sleeve, speaking rapidly in Serbian. Elena listened, then translated. "She says there are men with guns moving through the trees about half a kilometer behind us. They're wearing different uniforms than the ones we saw at the monastery." Morrison felt the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. Communications down, unknown hostiles approaching from the rear, and his team scattered across unfamiliar terrain. "What options?" Elena was already moving, her mind racing through possibilities with the speed that had made Ghost 7 legendary. "There's a ridgeline about 300 meters northeast, good sightlines, multiple escape routes, defensible position." "And if we're already surrounded?" "Then we find out how much Crawford really wants me back alive." They began moving toward the ridge, but Elena's prediction proved accurate. They were walking into a carefully prepared trap. The ambush was triggered when they were exactly halfway between the forest and the ridgeline, caught in open ground with minimal cover. The opening volley came from 3 directions simultaneously, forcing them to dive for whatever concealment they could find behind scattered boulders and fallen trees. Morrison felt the impact before he heard the shot, a burning sensation across his ribs that sent him sprawling behind a granite outcropping. Elena was beside him instantly, her hands checking the wound with professional efficiency. "Through and through, missed anything vital," she reported, already applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "But you're going to need medical attention soon." "Boss," Tank's voice carried across the open ground from where he'd taken cover near a cluster of pine trees. "I count at least 12 shooters, coordinated firing patterns, professional spacing." Elena helped Morrison prop himself against the rock, then began scanning the surrounding terrain with eyes that had learned to read battlefields like books. "This isn't random. Look at the positioning. They're not trying to kill us, they're trying to pin us down." "For what?" Elena's expression darkened. "For him." A voice echoed across the clearing, amplified by military-grade speakers. It spoke in English with a refined accent that carried undertones of education and authority. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, or should I say Ghost 7, you have led us quite a chase, my dear." Elena closed her eyes, her entire body tensing. "Victor Petrov. I know you can hear me, Sarah. Yes, I still prefer to use your real name. It reminds us both of who you really are beneath this humanitarian charade you've constructed." Morrison watched Elena's face as Petrov's voice continued, seeing the internal struggle playing out in her expression. Fear warred with anger, guilt battled with determination. "You cost me everything, Sarah. My career, my reputation, my future. But you also taught me valuable lessons about patience, about planning, about the importance of understanding one's enemy completely." Elena looked at Morrison, then at Tank's position, calculating distances and possibilities. He's not just talking to me. He's keeping us pinned while his forces move into final positions. 5 years I have waited for this moment. 5 years of tracking every rumor, every sighting, every hint that the legendary Ghost 7 might still be alive. And then your former handler, Dr. Crawford, provided me with something invaluable. Your exact location and the means to force you out of hiding. Morrison felt ice forming in his stomach. Crawford set us up? Elena nodded grimly. The entire mission was designed to flush me out, to force me to reveal my true capabilities. Crawford knew I wouldn't be able to watch your team die, especially not when I could prevent it. Tank's voice called across the clearing. "Doc, if you've got any of that old Ghost 7 magic, now would be a good time to use it." Elena looked at Amira, who was pressed against the rocks beside them, trying to make herself as small as possible. The child's eyes were wide with terror, but she trusted Elena completely. "Commander, I need you to understand something. If I do what's necessary to get us out of this, I might not be able to come back from it. Elena Vasquez might disappear permanently." Morrison studied her face, seeing the weight of the choice she was facing. "What are you talking about?" "To beat Petrov, to save your team, I need to become Ghost 7 completely, not just using her knowledge or her skills, but thinking like her, acting like her, being her." Elena's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "And Ghost 7 doesn't make choices based on compassion or morality. She makes choices based on tactical advantage and acceptable losses." "Elena." "I know things, Commander. Classified information that I've never shared with anyone. Intelligence networks, operational methods, psychological profiles, knowledge that could turn this entire situation around." She looked at Amira, then back at Morrison. "But using that knowledge means crossing lines I swore I'd never cross again." Petrov's voice echoed across the clearing again. "I grow impatient, Sarah. Surrender yourself, and I will allow your American friends to leave unharmed. Continue this futile resistance, and I will be forced to demonstrate why I was once considered Spetsnaz's most effective interrogator." Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them, Morrison saw the transformation beginning. The humanitarian aid worker was still there, but underneath it, Ghost 7 was awakening with deadly purpose. "Tank," she called across the clearing, her voice carrying a new authority. "I need you to create a diversion in 30 seconds. Maximum noise and destruction. Doesn't matter what you target." "Copy that, Doc." Elena turned to Morrison. "I'm going to use Ghost 7's knowledge to break this ambush, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If I don't come back from this, if Ghost 7 takes over completely, I need you to remember that Elena Vasquez chose to save your lives. That means something, even if the woman who made that choice doesn't survive the night." Morrison gripped her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. Both sides of you are." Elena smiled, but it was Ghost 7's cold, predatory expression. "We're about to find out." Tank's explosive charges detonated across the ridgeline, sending debris and smoke across the battlefield. In that moment of chaos and confusion, Elena moved. Morrison lost sight of her immediately, but he could track her progress by the systematic elimination of enemy positions. Ghost 7 was loose,
And she was reminding everyone why she had been one of the CIA's most feared operatives. The hunt had become the hunted, and Petrov was about to discover that some ghosts were more dangerous when cornered than when free. The hunt had become the hunted, and Petrov was about to discover that some ghosts were more dangerous when cornered than when free. Elena moved through the smoke and debris like a wraith, every step calculated and purposeful. Morrison watched in amazement as she systematically dismantled Petrov's carefully prepared ambush.
Ambush, using terrain features and tactical knowledge that seemed to materialize from nowhere. First position, neutralized, came her whisper through Morrison's calm, somehow cutting through the jamming with crystal clarity. 2 hostiles down, non-lethal, moving to secondary target. Morrison blinked in surprise. Non-lethal. Even fully embracing her Ghost 7 capabilities, Elena was still choosing to preserve life rather than take it. Through his scope, he watched her approach the second sniper position with movements that defied physics, flowing like water around obstacles, becoming one with shadows, appearing and disappearing as if she existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. How was she doing that? Tank whispered from his position, his voice filled with professional admiration. Elena's voice crackled through the comm again. Hidden weapons cache. Grid reference 274. Tank. Shaped charges on the ammunition depot should create sufficient confusion for extraction. How do you know about weapons caches? Morrison demanded. Because I helped establish them 3 years ago during Operation Nightfall. Russian intelligence was using this valley as a staging area for arms smuggling into Syria. The pieces clicked into place in Morrison's mind. Elena wasn't just remembering her old skills. She was using her encyclopedic knowledge of the region's hidden networks to turn Petrov's own resources against him. Third position compromised. Hostiles retreating to fallback positions. Recommend immediate movement to Rally Point Delta. Morrison helped Amira to her feet, noting how the child watched Elena's tactical display with a mixture of awe and recognition. Even at 12 years old, Amira understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary. Elena, Morrison called through the comm. Status report. A pause, then, Ghost 7 operational parameters fully engaged, but Elena Vasquez maintaining moral oversight. All enemy contacts subdued using minimal force protocols. Morrison felt a surge of relief. The woman he'd come to respect was still in control, even while accessing capabilities that bordered on supernatural. Movement from the northeast. Petrov's personal unit, moving to flank our position. He's not running, he's adapting. Tank struggled to his feet, checking his remaining explosive charges. Doc, whatever you're planning, better make it fast. I'm running low on party favors. Elena's laugh came through the comm, but it carried both Elena Vasquez's warmth and Ghost 7's dangerous confidence. Tank, remember what I said about using Petrov's own resources against him? Yeah? I just remembered where he keeps his personal ammunition depot, and it's right underneath his current position. Morrison felt a chill of anticipation. Elena had found her balance, the tactical brilliance of Ghost 7 tempered by the moral compass of Elena Vasquez. For the first time since the mission began, they had the advantage. Ghost 7 requesting permission to demonstrate why some legends are best left buried. Morrison keyed his comm. Permission granted. Show them what happens when they corner a ghost. Morrison keyed his comm. Permission granted. Show them what happens when they corner a ghost. The explosion that followed shook the entire mountainside. Elena had located Petrov's ammunition depot with surgical precision, detonating it at the exact moment his forces were positioned directly above. The blast created a crater 20 meters wide and sent enemy combatants scrambling for cover across the rocky terrain. But instead of pressing her advantage with lethal force, Elena did something that surprised everyone, including herself. Petrov, she called across the smoking battlefield, her voice carrying the authority of Ghost 7, but the moral weight of Elena Vasquez. Enough. This ends between you and me.
Morrison watched through his scope as a figure emerged from the smoke. Tall, athletic, moving with the controlled grace of a professional soldier. Colonel Viktor Petrov looked exactly like what he was, a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Sarah Chen," Petrov called back, his voice carrying across the devastated landscape. "Finally, you show yourself as you truly are." Elena stepped into the open ground between their positions, her hands visible, but her posture radiating deadly competence. "My name is Elena Vasquez. Sarah Chen died in Sarajevo 5 years ago."
Petrov's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Names are meaningless, my dear. You can call yourself whatever helps you sleep at night, but we both know what you are, a weapon pretending to be a healer." "Maybe," Elena replied, moving closer with each step, "but weapons can choose their targets, Victor, and healers can choose whom to save." Morrison tensed as the distance between them closed. Through his scope, he could see Elena's tactical assessment playing out in real time, measuring distances, calculating angles, preparing for violence while hoping to avoid it. "You destroyed my life," Petrov said, his weapon trained on Elena's center mass. "My career, my future, everything I had worked for." "You destroyed your own life the moment you chose to profit from human suffering," Elena replied. "I just documented it." The philosophical battle was as intense as the tactical one. Two professionals who had once shared operational methods now faced each other across a chasm of moral choices. "Crawford's waiting for you, Sarah. Your government wants their asset back." "I'm not an asset anymore. I'm a person who chooses to save lives instead of taking them." Petrov raised his weapon. "Then you've chosen to die as a fool rather than live as what you were born to be." Elena's response came not with violence, but with words that cut deeper than bullets. "Victor, you taught me something valuable during our time together. You showed me that the difference between a soldier and a murderer isn't the uniform. It's the choice to protect rather than destroy." For just a moment, Petrov hesitated. In that moment, Elena moved, not to kill, but to disarm. Her hand struck his weapon aside, while her voice continued its psychological assault. "I forgive you, Victor, for hunting me, for threatening my friends, for representing everything I used to be. I forgive you because that's who Elena Vasquez chooses to be." Petrov fell to his knees, his weapon scattered across the rocks. "Impossible!" Elena stood over him, mercy and strength perfectly balanced. "Redemption is always possible, Victor. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose it." The sound of approaching helicopters broke the moment's intensity. Morrison keyed his calm, hoping against hope that Ghost and Prophet had finally broken through the jamming. "Boss," Ghost's voice crackled through clearly for the first time in hours. "I've got eyes on 3 incoming aircraft. Crawford's people, but they're not alone. Looks like regular Army transport, not just CIA." Elena looked toward the approaching helicopters, then back at Petrov, who remained kneeling among the scattered rocks. "Victor, tell your remaining forces to stand down. This doesn't have to end with more bloodshed." Petrov's radio crackled as he spoke rapid orders in Russian. Across the mountainside, weapons were lowered and hands raised in surrender. The helicopters landed in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Crawford emerged from the first aircraft, flanked by personnel Morrison didn't recognize, State Department, based on their civilian attire and bureaucratic bearing. "Dr. Chen," Crawford called out, his voice carrying triumph mixed with barely controlled irritation, "you've caused considerable trouble." Elena straightened, and Morrison saw both sides of her identity merge into something new. Neither the guilt-ridden humanitarian nor the cold operative, but someone who had integrated both aspects into a coherent whole. "My name is Elena Vasquez, and I'm not going back." Crawford's smile was condescending. "I am afraid that's not your decision. You possess classified information vital to national security." Morrison stepped forward, tank beside him, despite his wounds. Crawford, Dr. Vasquez is under our protection. Commander Morrison, you're facing court-martial for disobeying direct orders and compromising a classified operation. Ghost and Prophet emerged from the tree line, their weapons lowered but ready. Ghost spoke first. Sir, with respect, our mission was to extract a civilian. That civilian is requesting asylum from her own government. One of the State Department officials stepped forward. Dr. Vasquez, we're prepared to offer you a compromise. Limited intelligence consultation in exchange for complete freedom to continue your humanitarian work. Elena looked at Morrison, seeing support in his eyes. She turned to Amira, who stood nearby, still clutching Elena's hand with trust that never wavered.
I'll provide intelligence to prevent specific imminent threats, Elena said carefully. But I won't return to active operations, I won't relocate assets, and I won't compromise the communities I serve. Crawford began to object, but the State Department official raised a hand. Dr. Vasquez, in recognition of your service and your current humanitarian efforts, the United States government accepts your terms. 6 months later, Elena stood outside a newly constructed medical facility in the mountains of northern Albania. The building combined state-of-the-art medical equipment with security features that would have impressed any military installation. Morrison approached from the perimeter, where he'd been consulting with local security personnel. His team had taken extended leave to help establish and protect Elena's new facility. "Patient load today?" he asked. 43 refugees, 15 local villagers, and 2 former Russian operatives seeking medical treatment, Elena replied with a smile that contained both Elena Vasquez's compassion and Ghost 7's quiet satisfaction. Tank emerged from the building, his shoulder finally healed, carrying Amira on his back. The child had become Elena's unofficial assistant and the facility's unofficial mascot. "Doc," Tank called out, "Ghost's got someone on the secure line, says it's about preventing an attack in Berlin." Elena nodded, understanding. This was her new life. Using her vast knowledge selectively, ethically, in service of protection rather than destruction. She had found a way to honor both her capabilities and her conscience. "Tell her I'll be right there," Elena said. She looked at Morrison, Tank, and Amira, the family she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. "Ready to save the world again?" Morrison asked with a grin. Elena laughed, the sound carrying both Elena Vasquez's joy and Ghost 7's quiet satisfaction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.